So since getting the Switch 2 at launch, I've played through a good amount of games on this, and I just want to talk about like my thoughts and feelings about the majority of the games that I've played on the Switch 2. Starting off with the flagship first-party launch game, Mario Kart World. I've always been a big fan of the Mario Kart series. I got to play a number of the console titles growing up, before getting Mario Kart DS for Christmas one year, I think 2010. And then I got Mario Kart 7, January 2012. And then I also got Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a couple days after getting my Switch, my first Switch, back in July of 2018. So this is the first time that I've actually gotten to play a mainline entry of the Mario Kart series at its launch. And overall, I do like it. The increase in player count from 12 from 8 Deluxe, and even Wii, to 24 in Mario Kart World, it does make things kind of insane at times, especially because they brought the double item system from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe into this game. So hypothetically, whenever you hit a cluster of item boxes, there's a possibility that there's gonna be about 30 items being thrown all at once. I do like the extra chaos that all those extra items bring, especially if you get a certain set of items that let you kind of power through everyone. It just feels all the more, like, satisfying to get up into first. Even though, yeah, it's not fun to get hit by so many more items and then just find yourself in 24th. I'm personally still trying to get acquainted with the item system in this game, because each Mario Kart game operates and feels differently because of, the different items that are in each game. And once you're familiar with how the different items, will essentially interact with each other, you have a better sense of the possibilities of what all could possibly happen. Like that. Probably my favorite thing about this game is Knockout Tour. Traditionally, with the Grand Prix structure, you do 4 races, one after another, and depending on how you finish in each race, you're given a certain amount of points. And yeah, Mario Kart World does have a Grand Prix mode. In Knockout Tour, you're going from one end of the open world continent to another through 6 different courses. And every time you enter a course, if you are in the bottom 4 placements, you're just knocked out, completely out of the race. And I feel like it helps to justify the fact that all these courses are on one big interconnected continent, because otherwise it probably would have felt kind of weird driving from one course to another. It just makes the journey of going from the very start to the very end just feel more natural, I guess, because everything is structured this way. And whether you're doing Knockout Tour or Grand Prix, when you're going from one track to another, you end up driving on a connecting route, or what people have been calling intermissions. I think the connecting routes actually serve to alleviate an issue from previous Mario Karts. That being, if you were playing with someone who has already played the game and knows all of the tracks like the back of their hand, they can just go on autopilot, and anyone else who has spent less time with the game is inherently at a disadvantage because they may not have the routes ingrained into their psyche. Because once you get to a certain point with practicing a specific Mario Kart game, you're really not thinking too much about where you're steering and when you do turns, when you do drifts. It is just autopilot, basically. And because there's 200 something connecting routes on this continent, no sane human, and even some of the insane humans, are not going to memorize the exact layouts of all of the connecting routes. Yeah, a number of the connecting routes are not exactly complex in nature, but given the fact that, you're dealing with extra items on the playing field, and there's certain items like the Kamek Orb that will not only transform everyone in front of you, but also just spawn in hazards just on the spot, means that, yeah, in a split second, you have to be dealing with a whole bunch of extra garbage. And in some of the patches that they've done post-launch, they have actually changed the layouts of specifically water connecting routes, which are probably easier for them to do, considering that the only thing that is defining the route are basically just buoys, whereas the land connecting routes are more set in stone, basically. So probably the only way that they can edit those is by completely changing the terrain. Suffice it to say, I enjoy the connecting routes because it feels more like an equalizer if you're playing with people at varying skill levels and knowledge levels. Now, even though I enjoy the fact that this is all like interconnected in the actual races, I kind of feel like mixed with the open world. Like, yeah, it is fun to have hundreds of challenges and collectibles and everything to find. It's clunky. Basically, there's no real good way to find everything in-game without consulting like an online guide. You see down here I have 304 of the P-Switch missions. I think there's like 400, so I'm about 75% of the way there, but unless I want to scour every single corner of this giant continent to find all of them myself, which would take who knows how long, like, it just seems better to, at some point, give up on that idea and just, you know, open up Google. Especially now with one of the updates that they did that shows all of the P-switches that you've at least touched. Because then now you can cross-reference this with an online map to see what you're missing. For the longest time, you couldn't do that, so in that instance, you were extra fucked. It really feels like the free roam mode isn't actually meant to be completed, as weird as that is, just like because of that decision for so long to not at the very least show you what you've already done. And this game retails normally for $80. Now yes, I did get the Mario Kart bundle, so I effectively got the game for $50, which is only $10 more than what I paid for Mario Kart 7 back in the day. But from what Nintendo has said, that bundle is likely not going to be a thing for the entirety of the Switch 2's life cycle. There are going to be people who, in the future, get the Switch 2, realize they also want to get Mario Kart, and are like, oh no. Considering that this is one of the big blockbuster titles for the Switch 2, I don't expect it to be discounted in any way outside of like any reprints of this system bundle. Mario Kart is, for me at least, a game that over the course of this thing's life, I'm probably going to play for several hundred hours. So in that sense, I am going to get my money's worth, especially because, you know, again, I got it for $50. But regardless, that is gonna be a hard pill for people to swallow. It really should have been the standard price for a lot of the other Switch 2 exclusives of $70. Even the $70 price tag, I feel, in some ways is questionable, other ways is justified. Game development and game development costs are just a conversation that I'm not well equipped to have. Like, yeah, the Switch 2 is capable of better frame rates and higher resolutions, but yeah. That all being said, I do still enjoy the game quite a bit. I just can't play it, like, super intensively within, like, a short period of time. The first, like, month with this system, and Mario Kart World being, like, the only actual Switch 2 game that I had, it just kind of felt like, okay, I need something else. And I say actual Switch 2 game because I was just curious, okay? In short, I feel like Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour was very badly misrepresented, even just with the title, and that title influencing how people interpreted this, and therefore kind of tainting the idea of what this game is. A lot of people have referred to this as a $10 instruction manual for the system, but in reality, this is more of like a guided interactive documentary on the decisions that were made on various aspects of the console's design, which is why I think the Japanese name of this, that being Nintendo Switch 2 Secrets Exhibition, because it does go into, a lot of the aspects of the design of different things. Even if some of these are just like, oh, the Switch 2 charging grip can charge Joy-Con, but it does follow up a lot of that, Captain Obvious information with some, actually kind of useful information. For example, when the Joy-Con 2 charging grip is connected to the dock or Nintendo Switch 2 console with a USB cable, the Joy-Con will communicate with the system via that wired communication. So I guess if you were in an environment where there's a lot of wireless interference, like maybe if you were playing this in, say, a college dorm where there's 50 billion Wi-Fi signals bouncing around, this would probably be a good way to hardwire your controller connection if you wanted to play in tabletop. Because yeah, just like the original Switch, when the Joy-Con 2 are connected to the main Switch 2, it just switches over to wired communication via the center hole here with the connector pins that attaches to this point here. So yeah, some of these do give you actual legitimate tips, but it also documents the thought process of specific aspects of the design. Like how during the design process of the Joy-Con, they tried just making an original Switch Joy-Con, but bigger, and found that for certain size hands, it just wasn't comfortable to access everything. So they had to adjust the positioning of everything on the Joy-Con 2, down to the millimeter. Or again with the Joy-Con 2 and their new mouse mode, typical mice sensors are really only tuned to sense from kind of narrow distance, but because of the wrist strap attachments that you can add to this, that does raise the sensor up just a slight bit, and so they had to make sure that the sensor could sense the surface that it was on, both with and without that strap attachment. Even as you progress further, it goes into things like machine learning calculations and this, the Switch 2 can do ray tracing and just various other more technically minded information. Even though they still word things in a way that most average people can still understand, this software, from its conception, was not going to be everyone's cup of tea. So that's likely why, it costs $10. And is why I also don't think it would have been the greatest as a pack-in. Yeah, there are mini games and tech demos that show off a bunch of the different features of the system, but they really don't have as wide of appeal as something like Wii Sports, where it contextualizes the motion controls of the Wii Remote into something that everyone understands, sports. Yeah, I just think that the localization of the name of this software for outside of Japan was not really well done, and perhaps that set up just some false expectations from people. I do legitimately still come back to this software occasionally just to mess around with some of the minigames or tech demos, or just reread a bunch of the insights. Because yeah, this is probably the most transparent in recent memory that Nintendo has been in all these little decisions that they made with the system, ensuring that there is more airflow inside of the Switch 2 than there was in the original Switch, because the air inlet is directly on the bottom of the system instead of the original Switch being on the back panel. As it says right here, Nintendo Switch 2 provides roughly twice the airflow of Nintendo Switch. So if that kind of shit is interesting to you, then you're the kind of person that this is made for. Like me, I like learning about this kind of dumb shit. Now to something that definitely has more mainstream appeal. Banana. I was initially a little taken aback about the fact that Switch 2 wasn't immediately getting a brand new 3D Mario. I absolutely loved Mario Odyssey, and is one of my highest play counts of any game on my Switch. I'm pretty sure that I spent at least 300 hours in that game, just replaying it over and over again. And Donkey Kong Bonanza takes the format and structure of Mario Odyssey, and I think it perfects it. Just everything about this game just feels super, like, satisfying to interact with. Both the terrain destruction, but also just Donkey Kong's movement feels almost better, I think, than Mario's movement in Mario Odyssey. Like, don't get me wrong, Odyssey felt super smooth and responsive to use and, like, interact with. But something about how Donkey Kong controls just feels like a slight bit better, and I can't really put into words why. It's also kind of funny that the main collectibles in this game, the Bananza gems, you don't actually have to collect any of them in order to progress the story. And that's notable because whenever you collect 5 Bananza gems, you can upgrade one of Donkey Kong's stats? Like it's a fucking RPG or something? So once you get to the late game, you just feel like this borderline unstoppable force. Unless if like an enemy or boss from the late game hits you, or you interact with like harmful terrain like spikes or whatever, then yeah, you're gonna be hurting. It's really cool that they took the outfit idea from Mario Odyssey and actually made the different outfits change the gameplay. So the outfits don't just change your appearance, but they also give you some kind of perk, which really helps to incentivize as you're going through a playthrough, like changing out your outfit to give yourself some kind of leg up. And that, plus the fact that you can improve Donkey Kong's stats, really comes into play in the Emerald Rush DLC. It effectively recontextualizes most of the areas in the game to be a roguelike collectathon. Basically, you have a set amount of rounds that within each 100-second round, you have to collect a certain amount of emerald ore. If you don't, then the run just ends. And whenever you collect a Bananza gem or a fossil that in the main game you'd use to buy new clothes, they'll give you some kind of temporary perk within that Emerald Rush run. Not to mention that you're also collecting Bananza chips, which within an Emerald Rush is what you use to regain your perks here within the skill list. I'm legitimately considering doing a video just talking about why I think Emerald Rush is so good and just super smart. But even just the base game of Donkey Kong Bananza, I absolutely loved this game. So much so that, yeah, 100%ed. Outside of Emerald Rush, I'm still coming back to this game to work through that. And I seriously think that anyone who has a Switch 2 that likes platformers to any capacity needs to get this game. It is that good. That all being said, I am still very much so looking forward to whatever 3D Mario is going to come to this system, because I feel like Bananza really like perfects the structure that was laid out in Odyssey. So really, I want to see them do like wild, crazy shit with whatever the next 3D Mario is going to be. I'd rather not a new 3D Mario game be completely open world, similar to the open continent of like Mario Kart World, or even like the open worlds of Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. I don't really want that for 3D Mario. I don't know, I just don't feel like it would like work well. I'd be happy to be wrong about that if they found a way to make it actually like feel good. I just feel like sort of like the fishbowl, like open zones or like open areas are kind of like better suited for Mario specifically. I don't know. I will say this Emerald Rush DLC should have just been a free update and not $20, especially because they bundled in DK Island. That doesn't sit right for reasons that would involve spoiling Mario Odyssey, which at this point it's been like 8 years or something. But still, there's probably some people out there who are experiencing Mario Odyssey for the first time on Switch 2. So for those people, look away. For everyone else, here's just like a couple walls of text for you to pause and read. Okay, y'all that were looking away from the screen, you can look back again. Speaking of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, those two games got Nintendo Switch 2 editions. These Nintendo Switch 2 editions basically equate to faster load times, higher resolutions, as well as, wait for it, 60 FPS. This is very dark. Okay, now you can kind of see it. These Switch 2 editions also let you use the Zelda Notes app in the Nintendo Switch mobile app, which just, like, points you in the direction of collectibles. Something about it is just very funny to me, that Nintendo's like, oh, yeah, we'll just give you a GPS. I guess at this point, they probably just figured that if someone wanted to complete these games, it's like, yeah, sure, we'll just give all the information to you. Considering that these games just look and run so much better, and considering that, you know, load times are shortened, so whenever you warp to somewhere else, you're waiting for a shorter duration of time. I've legitimately been considering replaying Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, not one after another, but just doing that, because I've only done one playthrough of each, just to experience them again in their official definitive format, which, replaying these games is actually a lot, easier, I guess, to do with the Switch 2 editions, because a second save slot has hit your system. For some reason, this second save slot is exclusive to the Switch 2 edition. If you make progress in the first save slot and have, like, save data sync turned on via Switch Online, everything that you do in this first save slot will still be read by an original Switch, but anything you do in Save File 2 is completely Switch 2 exclusive. It is nice having these games, like, run and look better. The fact that it costs an extra $10 if you don't have Switch Online expansion pack, I don't like. I think overall, performance, resolution, and game share should not be locked behind paid Switch 2 editions, because there's other games out there where those things were added to original Switch games for no additional cost. It's just that with, like, the Switch 2 editions, they lump those in along with extra features like the Zelda Notes app and whatever. And in the case of, like, some other games, just full-on, like, borderline DLC. So as part of Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack, you have Gamecube games, which are exclusive to Switch 2. I've heard some people complain about that, but given the fact that the retro games that are on Switch Online are basically purely emulated, there's, like, no porting over whatsoever. These are just running within emulators. They're likely exclusive to Switch 2 because of the increase in processing power, because emulating isn't always the easiest thing for hardware to do. So far, I've only put a notable amount of time into Luigi's Mansion and Chibi Robo. I played the 3DS remake of Luigi's Mansion back when that launched, and I immediately played this when it was added to Switch Online, and yeah, I think it still holds up. Granted, the structure of the game doesn't feel as, like, open-ended as, like, I thought it was. It really does feel, like, linear in its progression, but I still very much so enjoyed my time with this game. Except for the ghost catching mechanic. I don't know, I just have, like, trouble with actually consistently catching ghosts without them slipping, like, out of the poltergust. And then also, yeah, this is my first time playing through a proper Chibi Robo game. I did play through Photo Finder on the 3DS, like, way back in the day, but it was, like, part actual Chibi Robo game and part just photography game. But yeah, really enjoyed my playthrough of the original Chibi Robo. Kind of like with any game that's structured like this, I almost always end up hitting a point where I don't know how to progress the main flow of the game, and so, like, I just fumbled around for, like, a few hours just, like, exploring everything, and then it just got to the point of, forget this, I'm pulling up a guide. That being said, still really enjoyed it. More people need to play it. Considering the fact that GameCube games released the same time as the Switch 2, I feel like there should be a larger selection by this point. It's just getting to the point of just being ridiculous, especially with Virtual Boy games. They're drip feeding those as well. Like, okay, what are we doing here? That being said, the app is already 9 gigabytes big. That's probably because with a lot of the ROMs that are on here, you can enable North American and European versions. So with a lot of these games, you end up downloading them twice just for the different non-English languages. So I really feel like there should be an option to be able to only download the North American versions of the games. If, you wanted to reduce the space taken up on your system. Going back to another Switch 2 edition, this title, Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 edition plus Jamboree TV. This basically adds better resolution, mouse-controlled mini-games, as well as stuff that uses the camera and microphone. Not to mention, they put Game Share as a feature that you can only get if you pay for the upgrade. Which granted, because I already had Super Mario Party Jamboree, it was only an additional $20, but still. I haven't really spent as much time with the new minigames and everything, but I have spent enough time with it to say, you don't really have to get this if you don't want to. Particularly if you prefer playing this game with Pro controllers, because those new minigames are Joy-Con only because, they use the mouse function. So at that point, you're really only getting slightly crisper visuals, and yes, a new, 2v2, team mode for Mario Party. You'd really have to be into those specifically at that point to warrant the purchase. This just feels like something that ultimately you could just pass on. It's also weird because all of the Switch 2 enhancements are in this completely separate instance of the game, because you can basically boot the game into its base Jamboree mode, and you don't get better visuals in docked mode. It does look better in handheld, because otherwise it would have been a 720p game running on the 1080p screen. It doesn't look as good. But also, the Pro rule set for Mario Party is only accessible in the standard version of the game. You cannot play with Pro rules in Jamboree TV. It's just, this is so weirdly disjointed that it's hard to recommend this. Especially if you don't even have the base game yet. At that point, you're spending $80 for a Mario Party game. Granted, they probably had to separate the Switch 2 enhancements and exclusive functionality into its own, different sandbox, because of save data. Basically, any matches that you save your progress in this base Jamboree mode can also be read on an original Switch. And any matches that you save in Jamboree TV are saved in their own, separate pool of saves. And conversely, if you start a saved game in Mario Party Jamboree on your same Nintendo account on an original Switch, that will be read in the Switch 2 edition here if you boot it up into just standard Jamboree mode. So suffice it to say, I think that's why they had to do this weird, arbitrary sandboxing. It's still just kind of strange, though, but I understand that they want anything that can be still read by an original Switch to still act like the original Switch version without any, issues. So that's probably why they didn't even give this, resolution enhancements, like the base Jamboree mode, is just in case if there would have been any, weird quirks that, making the game run at a higher resolution would introduce. I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing, but I think it has to do with the intercompatibility of saves between Switch and Switch 2. I also think there's that separation because Super Mario Party Jamboree has certain online modes. So I think they just want to ensure complete and total compatibility for everyone, regardless what system you're on. And so these certain online modes are only accessible in the original Switch version. and not in the instance of the game that has various Switch 2 enhancements. Now, unless you were already into Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I'm not sure it's worth it to get Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Star-Crossed World. Like, yeah, this upgrade pack does give the game 60 FPS support and, like, better resolution, both handheld and docked. Not to mention, like, you know, faster load times, like, basically everything else. But there's about a dozen extra levels that you get with this Switch 2 edition. It is really cool, some of the things that some of these stages do. Ultimately, I don't think it's enough to warrant someone who wasn't already a fan of Forgotten Land before to get the full-on Switch 2 edition. It's also kind of strange because they didn't add game share support to this. Because yeah, other games that have like single-screen co-op, like Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, that was updated with, among other things, game share support. It's kind of odd that they didn't do that with this Switch 2 edition. Although the sharper visuals are really nice when you're playing on a big, like, 4K TV. So these aren't specifically Nintendo Switch 2 editions, but Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2 were given standalone releases as original Switch games, although they run at 4K in docked mode, 1080p handheld mode on the Switch 2. This is finally my first time fully playing through Galaxy 2 in its entirety. I started doing it on the Steam Deck, but I just stopped playing it for whatever reason. And even though I have Super Mario 3D All-Stars, I did end up rebuying Galaxy 1 because the re-releases of both of these games let you control the pointer in handheld mode with motion controls. You don't need to use the touchscreen like the version of Galaxy did in 3D All-Stars. I feel like they should have just patched that in, but whatever. They could have also gone the route of making this a Switch 2 edition with Galaxy 2 as the DLC, but then again, Mario 64 is already on Switch Online. Sunshine is coming to GameCube Switch Online. Don't know why that wasn't a launch title. I don't know, certain aspects of this double pack release were just weird, but I fully played through both games again, and I mean, I love Mario 3D platformers, so I love these. Although, if you do own Mario 3D All-Stars, I would say don't rebuy Galaxy 1. You can just rebuy Galaxy 2 separately on the eShop. It is kind of unfortunate that the only physical release of these games is in the $70 double pack. Going back to Kirby Air Riders. I never played the GameCube original, so this is my very first time with anything Kirby Air Ride, and I really like the fast-paced, like, frenetic nature of this compared to what feels like calculated chaos of Mario Kart. Yeah, most of my playtime has been in City Trial and Road Trip. Road Trip is like a single-player mode. It has like a similar structure to specifically Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS's classic mode, where like you're only given a couple seconds to choose between a couple different options of like challenge, basically, and completing that challenge lets you progress. And Smash 3DS's Smash Run mode was modeled after City Trial. I think I've spent more time in Smash 3DS than I did in Smash Ultimate. In some ways, I do prefer Smash 4 over Ultimate. So yeah, I really do enjoy like the structure of these modes, and also just like the racing and like battle aspects. I haven't spent as much time in this game as I've kind of wanted to. I've only put like 10 hours into this, and even though like I'm a Kirby Air Ride novice still, this does feel like decently approachable to someone that has never played the original, even though it is like more fast-paced. It is cool that this is a Switch 2 exclusive that game share was added to, so people that have a original Switch can actually play Kirby Air Riders multiplayer, because the game isn't actually running on their original Switches, it's only running on the host Switch 2. And even if you have friends that live far away that also have Switch 2s but not Kirby Air Riders, well, you can still all play online together via game chat. I think the only game that doesn't support game share via game chat is Mario Party Jamboree. Overall, Air Riders is very solid. I just don't know how many new people this game will actually attract over time. Like, yeah, it's sold like several million copies already, but it'll be interesting to see how much higher that number does actually go up. So, I don't really want to dig out the game card for this because I'm running low on camera storage. But with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, for most of my playthrough, I did enjoy my time with it. It's just once I was, like, winding down to the end of my 100% playthrough, looking back at it, a lot of the cracks really did start to show. Namely, just the structure of all of the areas just feels so much more linear than the original Metroid Prime. I first played through the original Prime summer of 2024, my very first Metroid game. Fell in love with it, just because of how open-ended everything felt in, like, the structure of all of the areas, and how, like, the way forward wasn't immediately obvious, and so you spend some time trying to figure it out for yourself, but if you have the hints enabled, it will point you in the direction that you should go. Now, that's not to say that, like, the NPCs in Prime 4 irritated me. Honestly, they didn't, but the fact that Miles will just give you hints unprompted when on the map screen for Soul Valley, there is a button to specifically page him for a hint. Like, the game should just not, unprompted, give you a hint as to where you should go, what you should do next. It should just be behind that button. Those two were kind of like my biggest gripes with the game. How the hell did I not mention Soul Valley during my recording? It's just like a big, pointlessly empty desert area that almost serves no other purpose than to, like, justify the existence of the Viola motorcycle that Samus gets after, like, the first big main area, and also to justify the green crystals that they decided to sprinkle all around the desert, which you need a certain amount of in order to actually gain access to the final area. I don't know, they could have done a better job with designing a hub area like what they did in Metroid Prime 1 with the Talon Overworld. But no, it's just a big open field of some crystals and some enemies and a couple, like, random shrine things. They really could have done better with it. If anything, the issues that I had with Prime 4 just makes me more excited to eventually get to Metroid Dread. And also, I think eventually I just want to play through as many of the classic, like, Metroid games that I can. It was really cool to have a game that you could play through in its entirety with mouse controls. It might feel a little awkward at first, but once you kind of dial in, like, the settings, it felt surprisingly natural to play, like, so much of the game with mouse mode. I will say, do not set the controls to, pointer fusion? That more so replicates how the Prime games on Wii worked with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. I don't think that works great with the mouse controls. Just keep it on dual stick fusion. And also maybe swap the bindings of your right shoulder buttons, so then your main fire is basically your left click, and your missiles are basically your right click. The original Switch version of this doesn't run that bad either. But yeah, considering how much development time this game has gotten, the fact that it strays far away enough from why I loved the original Metroid Prime, it is kind of disappointing. I did ultimately still have, like, overall, a fine time with it, but, your mileage will definitely vary. Now, for an original Switch game that I played through for the first time on the Switch 2 that did not release in 2025, The Blob. This was my first time playing through The Blob. I never owned a Wii as a kid, but I've heard great things about The Blob. The whole, like, art style and especially the soundtrack just goes together so well and creates, like, such a good atmosphere, like, a feel that would really only come from a game from that time. Like, at a certain point, it did feel like it was dragging on, and the fact that you can't save in the middle of a level, you have to do it all in one go. So I had to rely on the sleep mode functionality of the Switch to be able to actually finish levels. Like, I'd play for a bit during lunch and then put it to sleep, and then when I get back home from work, played through the rest of that level, and then maybe started a new level, put it into sleep mode before going to bed. Yeah. Eventually I do want to get to Blob 2, but yeah, I do feel as though the original one did kind of drag on for perhaps a bit longer than it should have, but overall, yeah, definitely a solid title. So on Nintendo Switch 2, this game runs at basically a locked 60, or is like most of the time 60 FPS. On the original Switch, it's like not quite that. It's kind of like a more dynamic and inconsistent frame rate. Like, for a second there it was 60, but now it's like down to more of like a choppy, just not great feeling frame rate, especially after playing through like this whole game on the Switch 2, where it just ran like super smooth. I just want to quickly point out some games that have like actually obvious improvements on the Switch 2. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, I played through it at the start of last year, so not when the Switch 2 was out, but this game has an option called Unleash the Beast or Unlock the Beast that basically uncaps the frame rate. And on the original Switch, it would hit 60 FPS, but it would pretty frequently dip down. But with messing around with the game on Switch 2, it stays at 60 FPS pretty consistently. Definitely not a bad way of playing through that game. Next, Nippon Marathon. This is like a 3D sort of platforming racing game where you're going through areas inspired by Japan, and a bunch of just crazy crap happens. On the original Switch, it does dip in frame rate a fair bit. Not so much on the Switch 2. It does kind of in some instances, but not nearly as badly. Next, Wheel of Fortune. This game ran at like 30 FPS and lower at points on the original Switch. On Switch 2, it's 60 FPS. Just something about like Wheel of Fortune of all games having such a stark difference in performance is just incredibly funny to me, considering the fact that it's a kind of game that doesn't need high frame rates. And lastly, I got this game after getting the Switch 2, but from my research, I've heard that this ran worse on the original Switch. Fitness Boxing 3, Your Personal Trainer. Apparently this game would run at 30 FPS and below, which isn't that great for a rhythm game that is reliant on its visuals. But Switch 2 is the better way to play this game because it does run at, I think, if not a locked 60, pretty much a consistent 60. I have only played this a couple times. These days, I prefer, for my exercise, just going onto the treadmill, but knowing that I have this as an option for exercise has been nice. Like, overall, I think Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza are, like, the two absolute must-haves. Other than that, see if the games that you already own have any sort of Switch 2 enhancements, and yeah, just go from there. It's hard to recommend games, I've found. So yeah, with the length of this video, you can tell why I didn't want to put this into my main Switch 2 video. Anyways, that'll be it for me for now. We'll see you later.